Hello, and welcome back to the Survivor's Mic podcast. I'm your host, Posh, and I'm excited and grateful, by the way, that we are on episode 17 and we are part of the Beyond Survival series. So, this week I want to talk about something that was triggered by a conversation that I had during this past week with an old friend of mine. And it is around the topic of traumatic recovery, right? Or healing from trauma. And hopefully next week we will talk about post traumatic growth, like living beyond, just, surviving that type of trauma. But before I get into the details of what brought me to want to do this episode, I want to give an example of how it kind of like looks like, or the difference between traumatic recovery and then post traumatic growth. And so when you get into that space of saying, okay, I have grown beyond the trauma, right? It is post, it is, after, right? And you kind of like you have something to show for it, right? You have signs that shows that you do acknowledge that you have went through things, but you managed to live beyond it, and you just don't say it by words. Your way of living shows that you have been healed, right? And when we talk about being healed, let's be clear that it doesn't mean that you truly canceled everything, you forgot everything that happened. No, you did not. But you've gotten into this space where you actually can stand before people and you can give like a testimony of where you have come from, and how far you have come. And to make it easy to understand, I'll give you an example of the idea or the definition that we give to healing, right? And we see this success stories. We see this, or the person really managed to rise up again and to live again, and here is where they are, right? And also then on the other side there is recovery, right? When you just came out of something, or you might not be coming out of it just now. It might have been years ago that you don't go through the abuse anymore. Maybe the abusive marriage ended up ending, right? And physically it seems like you became free. You're not in that space where you are being abused by your stepmothers like some of us grew up. You are not being molested anymore. You moved out of the house and that uncle is not abusing you or touching you anymore, and you are in the space of recovering. And that's what I want to talk about this week, because it's very interesting to know and to understand that it doesn't really look like how we perceive it to be. That season is a very, I would almost use the word weird season, right? We spoke about it the other time. It's like the messy middle. You are excited that you came out of it, but you don't ultimately feel free from it. It's still lingering in your mind. You're still having sleepless nights. You're still even questioning why it was you. Why me, Lord, right? Why did I go through that? Did I do something that sent out that message to that person for them to do whatever they did to me, right? And the list goes on and on. But then what we know, or what we see mostly, especially on social media, is more to do with, the post traumatic growth, we could call it, right? And one example to make my point here clear, or to clarify the difference between the two things that I'm talking about, would be a woman called Joyce Meyer. Really, she's someone I respect. I grew up finding hope and holding on to her teachings, and I used to read through her books, right? And sorry, in case there was some noise, something had happened to my mic, but I'm back now. And so Joyce Meyer, she has an interesting story, and it's not in my place to share her story, But for those of you who know the woman, you know that it's mind blowing, right? It's painful, but it makes you very excited as well at the same time to know that people can actually come out of that level of darkness, right, to become who they become. And so, for example, naturally we would know this for those of us who have been, sexually, molested or abused or whatever it can be. The ultimate thought process would be, I don't want to see people of my opposite sex, or I don't want to see people who just like resembles. If it was your uncle, you don't want to meet up with older men anymore. You are not safe anymore, right? That's what your mentality starts to train you for. And then to see someone go through that, and then years later, not only did they got married once, but they did twice or three times in some cases for some people. And guess what? The last attempt was actually successful. But before we even get to that part of them succeeding in the end, the fact that they actually gave it a shot is mind blowing to me. Because you would think they're gonna be on their knees the rest of their lives. They are destroyed by this thing or by this event, right? Or by this trauma, as we are talking about. And then they rise up, and then they do all these amazing things with their lives, and they succeed, and it looks glamorous, right? By the way, I started recording and I got to this glamorous word. It didn't come out well, so I had to restart. But forgive me, English is my second language. Anyway, back to what we were talking about. It's it's huge. You look at it and you know this has got to be someone who has been working beyond just who they are. And now this is where whatever you believe in comes in, right, into play. As you all know, on this podcast, I tend to Christianity because I am Christian. So you would look at it and think, wow, it can only be God who took this woman through all these kinds of things, or this man through all these kind of things, and it looks amazing. If you look at it, on the internet, on social media, it's beautiful, and we all want to be in that space. But the reality, though, which brings me back to this week's topic, the recovery, the phase of you just coming out of it, either physically coming out of a situation or coming out of it emotionally, because it could take you years before you can even comprehend, before you come out of the panic of what happened to you, right? And so I call it recovery, because it's until that season of your life. It doesn't matter whether it's 3 weeks later or it's 30 years later. When that light bulb lights up and you're like, okay, how do I possibly find ways to live through life and try to live beyond this? Yes, it happened, but I want to live on the other side of life, right? It is not beautiful. it's the most it's the most tormenting season. One of the things I've battled with, I think, since my teenage years, were because I went to train to be a preacher. For about 3 years I was in Bible school, we would call it, and there was a lot of things, or there are a lot of things that you learn about. And I remember always convincing myself whenever I made confessions to God that I had forgiven certain people, until a conversation about them starts, and then I'm like, oh, hold on. I don't think I'm still in the right mindset, right? Because the resentment would pop up, right? And it bothered me. It bothered me because I wanted to be in right standing with myself, and I wanted to be in right standing with God, of course, right? But I always realized and I always noticed that I wasn't there anymore. And it was frustrating to me, because I was putting so much effort. I was trying to convince myself that I had moved on. I'd moved past, all those things that had happened, and I had forgiven the people, but I would never want to meet up with them. And that was always a sign to me that maybe I haven't forgiven, but I have just pulled myself out of the situation, due to whatever chance that I got to be out of the household, to be out of the country, to be, out of the school, whatever the case may be. I just took myself out of the situation, but my mindset was still dwelling in that place. And I'm not even talking about this in a manner to try and guilt trip someone. It's a very normal thing to happen. It happens to people. It happens to us because we are human beings, we have emotions, and it's just not possible to wake up one day and you've forgotten everything that happened to you, especially things that are trauma related. So, this recovery phase I'm talking about, it's not beautiful, it's not pretty. It's almost impossible to romanticize because it's just very uncomfortable. You are trying to seek and you're trying to find yourself and you're trying to find peace around all these things. But then when reality hits and there are situations that kind of like, we could call it trigger you, or they bring back a certain memory, you would know by your emotions where you really stand. And it's not even coming to you as judgmental. I've spent years standing in that place. And I would be lying to you if I told you today I'm not standing in that place anymore because I do not know. Right? But then here's something interesting, which brings me back to why I actually wanted to talk about this week. So some few days ago, I had a conversation with a old high school friend of mine, and he knew me because he was raised in the location where the people I grew up with, they came from that location, and everybody knew our lives were not as beautiful. It was tough, and we were the children who were being abused, and the whole community knew about it and chose to never say anything about it, which is quite common. And he said something very interesting to me. I don't want to waste time by talking about everything that we said during the conversation, but he said to me, there are times I think about people who were raised the way you were, and it was brutal, it was tough. And people who were raised the way I was raised, as the only son in the household. And I was like this egg that nobody would want to crack. But when I look at your life now, in my life, I'm like, I wish they had been harder on me because I have no idea how to handle my life right now. And why am I saying this? It was mind blowing to me to know that even through these years where I was battling and thinking I'm not progressing, I'm stuck, I'm probably gonna die in the hands of these people abusing me, life was building up. Something else was being built up. Resilience was piling up, right? This whole, life of a survivor, even though it comes with its negatives, it taught me life, right? And so I'm saying this to say, because I know most probably there's someone somewhere thinking, "Oh, I thought I forgave these people." And there's nothing as painful as perceiving yourself as someone who has moved on until a certain situation comes on the table and you realize you had not moved on, you had not forgiven, you are still hurt. The scar, it's like cancer scars, because my grandfather had one of those. They just cover up on your skin, but they're eating up inside. That's how it feels like. So it's just deadly, you know right below, but on the surface, on the top, everything looks great. So you smile, you're happy, in some of our cases, I used to preach, and I would let people know how important it is to be a forgiving Christian, how important it is to move on and to love your enemies as as you love yourself. And I could not do it myself. It's not about being hypocrite, it's just the fact that that season of your recovery from trauma is just not as glamorous as people think. The idea of, especially when you start or when you begin to go through that process of saying, okay, I want to heal, it almost like all hell breaks loose. Like, why would you do that? So your mind is racing against you. You can't do it. You are not a forgiving person. And situations will pop up that will actually prove you right, or prove your thoughts right, because it's not you ultimately. But here's what I have to say this week: it is absolutely okay to be in that season, because every season has something that it teaches. And I think for me, that traumatic recovery where I was fighting and forcing myself to forgive, and I could not do it. I did not have the power to do it. I had no idea someone somewhere else would look at me and think, she got to be inspiration to me. I'm impressed by her resilience. The strength that this woman carries. I don't think I could ever do it. And for me, without even trying to look at gender or whatsoever, I'm an African woman. And our African men, they have to be strong all the time. And if a man comes to you and tell you your resilience and your strength as a woman is impressive to me, you got to take that seriously. They mean it with their whole heart, right? They mean it with their whole heart. And so while you go through it, don't be harsh on yourself. And if you don't have the strength to forgive, take it one day at a time. It's not something that you will choke yourself on to do. It comes with its own time. And I think even while we talk about that, the idea of also forgiving people and then knowing your boundaries and keeping your distance is also very important, right? Because I remember there was a season, this is very interesting. There was a season I was so prompted to have a conversation with someone who used to be, I would ultimately say, my best friend at some point in my life. And I remember having so much pressure to ask her for forgiveness. And I kept on thinking to myself, what for? She's the one who has to do that. I didn't do anything wrong. But I was so under pressure to do it that I ended up doing it. And her response even made me feel stupid, but I had the liberty. I was liberated to know that, okay, this is over and done with. I can move on with my life. And sometimes it's not really about the idea of winning. It's not about who is stronger and who is what. You just want to be in a state of peace with yourself. So sometimes all it takes is just, even if you say it verbally that you've forgiven somebody, and then you go ahead and still work on it, in your mental state, you know, working on how you would feel and the resentment, especially if you're around the people. But for me, one of the things I use is keeping my distance. And for some people, that might sound like, hey, yeah, you're still not forgiving, but I just know how vulnerable I can get and how quickly that can be taken advantage of. And so, whilst you're going through your process, also look at your weak points. Like, what is it that you do or that you are as a person that could get you to be abused quickly and to be taken advantage of quickly? And here I'm just talking about, people who have done things to you before and they still want to get access into your life. Because my case is, when I was a child, I could not just walk out of the household. But now, you know, as a grown woman who has lived 3 decades on earth, I have my choice to say, I'm moving to Milan, guys. I'm moving to Bali and distance myself. so that everybody can live their lives and they can focus on themselves. And it's a whole different discussion when then there are conversations about you or what. That's a different story. But if you know that you can become weak and be taken advantage of while you are trying to heal and move on, one of the solutions I use personally is distancing myself, at least physically, because this is double the trouble. You want to distance yourself physically, you want to distance yourself, mentally, and then emotionally, and the list goes on and on. So I'm wrapping this week up by saying, while you are going through your traumatic recovery, take your time to recover. Don't be hard on yourself. Don't judge yourself as an unforgiving person, someone who can't move on, someone who takes things too emotionally or emotionally immature. No, you are not. You're taking your process, you're taking your time, and trust me, even if it doesn't look so great, even if it doesn't look like you're progressing and you're doing something, you are actually doing something. And there will definitely be a day that that will be confirmed to you, that the work you were putting in is getting you somewhere, even if you did not notice. So, hey, I look forward to next week, and I look forward to talk about the post-traumatic growth slash healing. And this is what I leave you with this week, and I hope you can brainstorm around it. And I'm your host, Posh, and I will see you next week.